episode of the Going Rogue Gaming Podcast. I am Scott Berger. I'm joined here with my two longtime co-hosts of one episode, Colin Smith and Bill Wright. Say hello, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, if you're listening to this is the real shaky first episode that of every podcast that everyone always loves to listen to about games in the genre of roguelikes. You've probably heard of these if you have played many games recently. It's a growing field, and we thought we would start up a podcast to talk about the good ones. So part of the motivation behind this podcast that you're listening to is that this genre of games really kind of exploded over the past decade with hit titles like things like The Binding of Isaac and FTL and things like that. And I think it offers a really rich space for us to talk about these kinds of games and their evolution and where they've come from and where they're going and all that. And yeah, I think we'll have a good time talking about these games. The goals for this podcast, like every good podcast, has to have an objective. I think our number one goal is to just have fun here and play games that I think we will have fun playing, and some that we might not have fun playing, and get a chance to dunk on a little bit. And have an avenue to talk about them. I think another goal is to signal boost some lesser known ones. We'll get into that in a little bit, but there's a wide spectrum of games in this genre that are far more popular than others, and I think the ones that happen to be less popular deserve just as much attention. And we'll come to those when we get there, but. And then finally, another goal is to just rank these games as best we can against each other. There's a lot of different factors going into a lot of these, but which ones do we find the most enjoyable to play? Which ones do we think are the most important? We'll figure out those rankings as the podcast trucks along here.
Yeah, and I think that'll be a little bit of a learning discovery for us as well, because I mean, both Will and I have not played a huge number of roguelikes. So in some ways, we'll be learning the genre as we go. And so like for the review that we're doing today, our opinions on roguelikes and on the game that we're going to be reviewing are a little bit not set in stone yet. So our thoughts on it are unformed clay. We might have much more stinging criticism for things in the future.
No. Mine's all solidified. It's all perfect. There's nothing, no revisions. It's all good to go.
You already have all of your rankings for the games that we're planning on playing. Set
Come in with preconceptions. Do not change them.
So in this podcast, I think one of our main objectives is to look at maybe like the top, let's say 10-ish asterisk question mark games per year for this decade for the games released between like 2011 and let's say 2021 for now. And if there's enough interest, we can continue rolling that. But there's a lot of roguelike games out there. How many roguelike games do you guys think exist on just Steam at the moment?
Probably like 100, 120.
No, I feel like it's like 10,000 because Steam is ridiculous and roguelike games have a low minimum viable product.
Yeah, Colin is closer. He'll win the whatever the game.
Did I go over?
Yeah, it's Price is Right rules here. I'm pretty sure.
So for the Rogue is Right, Colin is the winner for this one. There's almost 5,000 games on Steam that have some kind of roguelike capacity to them. And I think like it's untenable for a podcast to kind of cover all of those until we get access to some sort of immortality machine. So that kind of helps to constrain our focus a little bit of just focusing on like, okay, what are like the best shining examples from each of those years. And from the Steam platform in particular, I think has, like you said, there's a low barrier to entry, let's put it. At least now there is. We'll kind of see as the history goes on about how that's changed a little bit. But yeah, there's a zillion games out there. Steam, I think, is a good repository because it just has the biggest breadth and maybe depth for this genre. And there's a lot of good data out there for us to just kind of like harvest off of like the Steam API and mine that into some nice juicy data sets that we can start building stuff out of. For the audience at home, I'm not going to go through the details of this algorithmic selection process because I'm not sure that that's what everyone's tuning in for, to hear about algorithms, but right into the show, and we'll talk about it more if that's something that you're interested in. All of you gentle listeners have to know is that the algorithm is perfect. It has selected the perfect list of games for us to cover, and to argue otherwise is to go against the nature of the state-of-the-art machine learning techniques that we have employed.
The numbers do not lie. They can't lie.
I think a little bit about the format of this show. I think each episode will do a little bit of background about the game or games that we'll be talking about for the week. In some cases, games like have you can see everything about these games in like 5 minutes or 15 minutes or something, so it makes sense to bundle them with others that are also similarly short. But for a given episode, I think we'll talk a little bit about like development history, maybe a little bit about the developers themselves or publishers if there's some interesting factoids there. And then we'll just jump into like, what's this game about? What is it like to play this and our experience playing it? And then, yeah, finally, and then, we dump it into our infallible rankings for roguelikes. So to kick us off, let's start with the least controversial topic for this. What do we think a roguelike is? Like, if someone has never come to this this genre before and they want to know, like, what is this? I'm super familiar with what first-person shooters and racing games are, but what the hell is a roguelike?
I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's like the game Rogue from the 1980s.
Oh.
A game which we all know and love. And
well,
have
you're
certainly
familiar
played.
with this one, right?
I mean, not really. I think I've heard of it. I've never played it, that's for sure.
Uh-huh. What was your two like first exposure to like a game of this massive genre?
Well, for me, it's got to be Slay the Spire. I think that's actually been that was a starting point for me in like being fascinated by this genre in particular, but also just like studying games and trying to figure out like what is the essence of fun. And so roguelike has this kind of this amazing property to it where the variability in the gameplay and what makes the engagement lose happen is really closely associated with the variation in the run and just doing it over and over again and having there be a lot of unpredictability around that. So a lot of surprises just baked into the game design, which I think is what sets it apart from pretty much everything else where you're going down like a linear story or something like that, where it's just the gameplay develops, you get stronger, enemies get stronger, et cetera, et cetera.
I think for me, it was FTL. That's the first game that I played that had that same sort of branching path where you don't really know. There's not a story in the traditional sense. You are getting random events and you aren't expected to beat it on the first try, especially, and maybe not really ever. Like there are certainly, it is rare that I win a game when I'm playing FTL, and it's probably because I'm not very good at it. But even having played a number of hours, it's you're just trying to unlock certain things. You're trying to get different paths. There's a lot of replayability, which I think is always interesting. I mean, the goal of the genre is replayability. Like a single playthrough means nothing. That the game is playing through it multiple times. Versus there's so many other games where after you've played through it once, you have done that game. I mean, it's like rereading a book. Many people do it, many people love it, but you're not going to get a different book out of it. If you play FTL twice, it's a different book.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, I don't know if I came to to roguelikes through Dwarf Fortress, but that feels right. And I think that like, well, I think Dwarf Fortress is kind of like that extreme hobby grade end of the spectrum of roguelikes. And then I think like the thing that really like
It's got the roguelike aesthetic in a lot of ways.
That's right. But like the 2013 version of Spelunky, I think is what did it for me in terms of like, and I think that like at this time, like Dark Souls had recently just come out. So there was like that added fervor of like, you know, games are hard and that's cool again, right? So something like Spelunky kind of, you know, like what if Mario was more Dark Souls? And like, oh, okay, like I could get behind that. And yeah, like you said, like the randomization aspect, like, oh, everything, every run, every time that you play the game, it's slightly different. So it's, you have to kind of adapt your strategy and all that to it. Some quick facts about roguelikes on Steam. Of all of the roughly 5,000 games that are have tags related to rogue type things, 66% are have a tag that's a roguelike. There's 62% of them that have something that's tagged a roguelite. And this is where I think we almost need to have a bunch of like linguistics people or like Linnaean classification specialists right into the show to be like, we need to fix this. 43% of all of the games on Steam are action roguelikes. We have, and then like we start to jump off a cliff here. Where like only 4.3% of them have tags related to roguelike deck builders. So you're kind of Slay the Spire types. There are 4.1% of them are traditional roguelikes, which we'll get into at some point. And then 2% are Roguevanias. Will's kind of going agog at the.
Is that basically just like side scroller, but rogue?
We'll get to it, but like Dead Cells is a good example of this.
Oh, okay.
Where it has that kind of like side-scrolling platformer. I don't know if a whip is required for that tag to be applied, but you know that kind of like
certainly helps.
Yeah, like Vampire Survivors is like that's got to be one of those, right?
I mean,
no, I don't think so because that's top down. That's a
Oh, okay.
But
I
yeah,
feel like
so
the Roguevania, I mean, that's like Metroidvania is another genre. It's the side scroll platforming with variations of weapons and et cetera, et cetera. We never really did talk though. I flippantly said they're like Rogue, but we didn't really explain what the genre is. I mean, I know for me, it's the randomization. That is the core of the genre, and I think that will push the bounds of the genre a lot because there are a lot of games that have randomization that it's a hard thing to categorize if just randomizing is enough to make it a roguelike. I know the previous starting the podcast we have talked about, is Diablo a roguelike? And I don't think it is, even though it does have some trappings of that in its like there's randomization. You're not getting the exact same thing every time. I don't think it quite meets the qualifications, but it's getting closer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the definitions of what goes into this kind of game type are now super nebulous, and they used to be pretty well defined before. But I think a goal for this podcast, I don't think, is for us to kind of like be exclusionary or say like this game is definitely a roguelike, this one is not. And I think the algorithm has decided for me to cast a very wide net to include things that may or may not be like roguelikes in the traditional sense, but have those kinds of gameplay elements. So like you were talking about, like randomization, procedural generation of elements of the game. Like every time you boot it up, like, oh, like the map will be different this time. High degree of
is a
I was just about to say like permadeath and like high degree of difficulty to enforce as a means of enforcing like an evolution of your play style, instead of just like, okay, like I'm just gonna restart my same character over and over again.
You can't just be a sneaky archer in Skyrim every single time.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that the 1980 game Rogue is super fascinating from like a historical perspective, because it really kind of lays the groundwork of like this whole like separate world of how games were developed back then, how you interface with them, and like having to develop I think they were like packages written in the C programming language that allowed you to have like maneuver a character around a screen. Like that didn't exist prior to it. Like 1980, that's not too far from the moon landing, right? I mean, like
I'm like trying to figure out when mice for computers became popular, because it's like about that same time.
Yeah, the mouse definitely came out after, which I think would partly inspire and explain why all those ye old ultra super ancient rogues, you know, you were basically using like Emacs style keyboard commands to get around, and you know, maybe that explains the popularity of Vim these days. But yeah, so I think we might finally have time to jump into our first game finally.
Let's do it.
So preamble, we can come back to some of those things as the podcast goes on. I know everyone's dying to hear more about Bayesian selection optimization algorithms, but let's maybe start with our first game. You're listening to this. We're going to be talking about the 2011 release Dungeons of Dredmor. This I think is actually like a really good game. This and like the next few episodes are really good games to kind of like set the stage for what roguelikes were at the time, and also like the breadth of this category. So at this time in 2011, when this game was released, this genre of like turn-based, grid-based movement, going into dungeons, like those kinds of games were largely dominated by, or that genre was largely dominated by games like NetHack, Dungeon Crawl, Stone Soup, and like I mentioned before, Dwarf Fortress. I think Will has played Dwarf Fortress. Colin, I think you've played Dwarf Fortress a little bit also. Have you guys played any of the other two, NetHack and Dungeon Crawl?
Not the other two, yeah, just
I've
Dwarf
looked
Fortress.
into playing NetHack, but did not do it.
I tried playing. Yeah, go ahead.
I played, I don't want to say a fair amount of Dwarf Fortress, because I know that isn't true relative to the people who have actually played Dwarf Fortress, but I have played enough of it to know how interesting it can be. I like the stories that come out of it a lot more than the actual act of playing it. And I am eagerly awaiting the Steam release of it, so that they finally have some better interface for it.
Wait, did you ever go too deep?
No, I don't think I ever got that deep.
Okay. Yeah, I think I gave it a fair shake too, but maybe a fairer shake in that sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many tens of hours of tutorials were part of that, but that's a whole other
Yeah,
thing.
I feel like my Dwarf Fortress plays ended up just being like watching videos of other people playing
Right.
Dwarf Fortress,
That
which was also
about
entertaining.
50-50. Yeah.
That's half the fun, yeah. So yeah, 2011 kind of dominated by this landscape of games of that ilk. And you could argue in a way, and this, you know, this might be part of things that we cover later in the podcast, that, you know, the explosion, I think Minecraft was released 2 years before this, and the original version of Spelunky was released in 2008. So we're kind of turning a corner game development history-wise of these really like popular old school ASCII-based rogue-like games, very much inspired by the 1980 ye old classic Rogue, NetHack, Dungeon Crawl, Dwarf Fortress, arguably, starting to move into the direction of like well, how do we make this more popular for, the general audience? I don't know that NetHack is something that, your average person on a bus would be playing on their Switch or anything. But yeah, that was I think a major kind of inspiration for the developers of this game. But let's jump into it. So Dungeons of Dredmor released July 13th, 2011. It is a kind of like a top-down, like 2/3 perspective game where you're controlling a character walking around the eponymous dungeons of Lord Dredmor. You can find this on Windows, Mac, Linux, and it was developed and published by Victoria, BC-based game developers Gaslamp Games. These were, I think at the time, three guys up in Victoria. And actually, I think a surprising number of games in this genre we'll find out have been developed by people in the Puget Sound / Seattle metro area.
Bunch of nerds.
Did you guys know that the developers of Dwarf Fortress live around the Seattle area?
No.
Slay the Spire too.
Yeah, I think we'll find that the Seattle area. So for gentle listeners' context, we are all scattered around the Seattle area. Hence our kind of fascination with people who are developers from here. But yeah, I think we'll find out that like areas that are major tech hubs also are major video game hubs. Maybe not so much of a surprise, but Gaslamp Games, three guys: Nicholas Vining, the technical director; Daniel Jacobson, the CEO; and David Baumgart, the art director. All joined forces. I think they were previous game developers who all kind of like joined forces to say, hey, we should make a roguelike game, but we should make it accessible. The development history for this game and for Gaslamp, I think they kind of hit it out of the park with Dredmor when it released in 2011. In December 2011, they released their first expansion, Curse of the Diggle Gods. We'll get to Diggles in a moment, a great little character. And then June 2012, they came out with, it's free now. I don't know if it launched free, but you can download this, or you can install this one for free. June 2012, the DLC titled You Have to Name the Expansion Pack, which I thought was fun. And then August 2012, their final expansion for this game, Conquest of the Wizard Lands. Gaslamp in 2016 would start work on their next game, Clockwork Empires, but I don't think it was as commercially successful as Dredmor. That was put on hiatus, and unfortunately in 2019, the studio was shuttered permanently, all their stuff kind of put on hiatus. Nicholas Vining, the technical director, would wind up going back to finish his doctorate in computer science at the University of Victoria, and work for Google and NVIDIA and all that fun stuff. And most of the others went to go work on a game called Star Sector. Have either of you heard of this?
Can't say that I have.
Wait, what's the what is Star Sector the one that's like Terraria?
No, I think I know.
That's Starbound.
Starbound,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, okay. Then I have not heard of Star Sector.
Star Sector is an open world single player space combat role playing exploration and economic game. From what I can tell from the website, I think it's kind of like a 4X inspired space game, but this is something, and this is I think a game that pops up on my radar like once every 6 months of like, oh yeah, that looks cool, but they have never put anything out on Steam yet. So I'm like, yeah, okay, I quickly forget about it.
Oh yeah, that's hard. I it's not on Steam. I'm less likely to see it for sure.
Yeah. In an interview with the magazine RPG Watch, game artist Dave Baumgart explained that the game is based on a quote immature build of a humorous roguelike game, which gave the programmer Nicholas Vining he had been working on since about 2006. He also noted the game's art sets the game apart from other traditional roguelikes that feature ASCII graphics. So like what we kind of mentioned before, NetHack and Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup. I think Dungeon Crawl these days does have like a graphical UI, but it is very kind of like tile based, and NetHack is very traditionally, your standard kind of Dwarf Fortress fare of like a confetti of apostrophes and commas all over the screen, and almost like modern day hieroglyphics. But yeah, I think they were inspired by, they've said in interviews that they were inspired by this 1995 game called Lindley's Dungeon Crawl. And that kind of inspired them to say like, well, yeah, what would a roguelike that was actually accessible be like? So something that you could use the mouse and your computer to fully control instead of just like, clacking away on your keyboard. Originally, the game didn't have any numbers in it.
Wait, like for anything?
I think for basically anything. Like, so for like stat values, like damage things, damage types and all that, from what I understand, I think like they only added those in about 2/3 through the way of development.
Did they just say like ouch and like a larger ouch?
Well, I guess like in the game, like when you're attacking monsters and stuff, it doesn't actually show like a number value for how much damage that you did, but there are like stat screens that say like, oh, your burliness is 23 or things like that. I think they added that in pretty late into development, but when the game was released on Steam, and at the time, like nowadays, like any person with a fat check in their wallet can release a game on Steam. But back then you had to know someone who knew someone to get your game on Steam. In the world of 2011, 11 years ago.
They only opened it up in like 2008 for people for all like the green light stuff. So yeah. It's interesting, like playing it, I'm looking at it from an 11-year later development perspective, and it feels old, but looking at the contemporary games that it was being surrounded by, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see where this is an innovation in that. Like as compared to a game that has ASCII graphics, it has amazing graphics and user interface.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you can click on something is
and this game was super popular when it was released on Steam at the time. This thing actually sat on like the bestseller list for like 3 weeks, which to look back on it now is like a monumental slam dunk of like, oh my God, like this is something that's more in like this niche territory that you're, fighting against like Counter-Strike, you're fighting against like, your Calls of Duties, your Portals, that something like this could jump in, and people like seem to have a decent amount of interest in it. And yeah, I think the developers were also saying that at the time in 2011 dollars, I don't know if this was Canadian dollars, but they said that they had a budget of about $2,000 to $3,000 to develop this thing, which when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's actually, I think, pretty impressive.
That just means that they were like, that money was just like to pay for like fees and things for like incorporating their company, and like, because they were taking no salary, obviously. They were not like, they were just developing this as a kind of their own thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's, to me, that just says they're doing it in their spare time,
right?
Which still impressive then.
Maybe even more so. But yeah, so yeah, let's jump into it. Like Dungeons of Dredmor, I've gotten the history out of the way. The first thing that you're greeted with when you boot this up is a character with shockingly huge eyebrows, which
huge.
and we're not joking when we say huge eyebrows. Like this is like 2/3 of your face. Head. Yeah, quite the eyebrows. And I love the intro text that when you start a new game, it says, "Once more, it is a time of adventure, of glory. It is time for a hero. Unfortunately, this hero is you. You have been summoned by the king to prove yourself, to save the land and its people, to join the heroes of legend in victory over the dungeons of Dredmor." So your objective in this game is to traverse 10 floors, 15 with an expansion, but 10 floors to get to the very bottom and fight Lord Dredmor himself for ultimate victory. And along your way, you're going to encounter all sorts of wacky objects. You're going to be boosting up your stats and skills like you do in any good fantasy setting. There's a lot of crafting that I have yet to figure out. There's zillions of items just kind of littering the floor all over the place, and all sorts of crazy enemies. Objects, things that you run across in this game. I think maybe one of the first objects I came across in this game that I was like raising my enormous eyebrows at were vending machines.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it's like, definitely out of place for everything else, which is like all thematic. I think it's kind of had a Nordic sort of a theme to it with the what was it, the fish that they had, the
Lutefisk.
the lutefisk, right, and all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like that kind of sets the irreverent tone of the game, where
Right.
I think like their overall objectives for this game were something that's like funny, accessible, and you can have a good time like blowing up monsters in. And I think they kind of like slam dunked on that goal, because like if the first thing that you're encountering in some like fantasy / steampunk dungeon is a vending machine, that kind of got a chuckle out of me the first time I saw it. But you have upgrade stations like the Anvil of Krong, great name. You have things that you can go and pick up side quests at called the Statue of Inconsequentia, which I thought was fun. There's just like a straight up 2001 monolith floating around on some of the floors, which I've yet to figure out how to activate those. But I think those are used for side quests, right?
Yeah. Eventually you sacrifice some kind of thing you pick up to fight a boss. Basically, it's always the same. It's very repetitive.
There are statues to Lord Dredmor scattered about that you get big experience boosts if you smash those, and a little notification of heroic vandalism, which I thought was fun.
I did get worried the first time that I broke one that it was like you get a thing and you're going to get punished later, and then eventually realize like, oh right, Dredmor's the guy that we're fighting. So breaking it is like I'm not a vandal. I am a good vandal. You're supposed to be breaking them.
Although with the propaganda posters that are littered throughout the game, kind of paint you to be a bad guy in a fun sense of like, this home wrecker has come into the dungeon, he's like screwing everything up, and you got to go and you Diggles that inhabit this dungeon, you got to go and destroy the eyebrowed one, as you referenced several times. There's lots of satanic displacement glyphs around that will teleport you to random parts of the floor. Levers, chests, bookshelves that you pick up crafting materials from. Stats, there's a lot of stats in this game, and I think I only kind of understand maybe like 25% of them, but I think that's part of like the comedic tone, is that instead of your traditional stats of like strength, wisdom, dexterity, you have things like burliness, sagacity, nimbleness, savvy, stubbornness, things like that, which I think is kind of a cute take on it. There's a lot of skills in this game. There are many skills, and when you first boot this game up, you're gonna have to pick 7 starting skills that kind of define what your skill tree is for the game. Did you guys have a synergy or set build that you liked more than others?
Well, I mean, my first playthrough was as like the traditional warrior. I figured I'm going to go in, I don't know what's going to happen. So to be a mage, mages feel like you kind of have to know the intricacies a little more. And so I'm just like, give me the beefiest guy with the armor and everything. And I managed to pick something that I guess resulted in some kind of synergy. I had no idea, because you can't actually see what the skill tree is below anything. You're just kind of like blindly guessing, like these look warrior-esque, and you don't want to mix your warrior with your wizard or rogue skills. You're kind of like confined to like 1/3 of all the skills that are available. And it ended up working out. I mean, on my first playthrough at the medium default difficulty, I got up to that Dredmor, got absolutely swamped by him, but it seemed to work out.
Yeah, I also did a warrior-based build, but I was maybe more of a D&D barbarian style. So like I didn't do any of the armor things because I wanted my in my head he's a shirtless barbarian running around just hitting things with a hammer. So I mean I did put armor on him because I don't think you can play the game without it. But yeah, I did hammer, Viking, smithing, mushrooms. Because eventually you had to add some stuff in. I was like, I don't know, mushrooms are kind of cool too. Maybe they're like magic mushrooms. Like that's a cool, like I'm sure Vikings did that. So that was definitely a weird flavor in there. Just like things just like my inventory is filled with ingots of ore and just 15 different kinds of mushrooms because I can't bring myself to drop them.
Yeah, there's a lot of items in terms of like mushrooms. There's like 20 different kinds of wine. Sometimes I think that makes it tough decision wise to figure out like, okay, do I want to keep a Merlot or do I want to go for the Chardonnay over here? And I'm having to almost do a bunch of like wine tasting in the game to figure out like, okay, this one will boost my mana the most. I should keep that. I think the skills themselves are hilarious and interesting in how different they are from like your kind of traditional almost kind of like Skyrim-y fantasy game where there was one I was just tinkering around with it last night where I'm like, oh, this one has like a leap to it. Like I figured that could be useful to like, you know, either get away from enemies or jump into the middle things. I think it was called like Nightly Leap or something, or like Nightly Jump. And I couldn't figure out how to use it at first. And I felt like an idiot for like 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, like I want to jump from here to there. Why are you not jumping? Until I figured out it is an L pattern, like on a chessboard.
Oh.
And that kind of
that's pretty good. I like that.
Like that kind of eye-rolling groan, like the initial like frustration of like the few minutes that it took me to figure out like why that needed to work the way that it did. As soon as I got the joke, I'm like, okay, that's the kind of humor that I think plays well in this game.
Yeah, and I think the humor, like, especially like thinking back to the world of 2011, I think this was solidly within the like humor of the time. A little bit more of the randomness element to it, which I think has faded away in the popular culture a little bit by now, but I can see how this could be an extremely refreshing take on the like very serious dungeon crawl genre up to this point. It's like, oh, this is the same but different, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's peppered all throughout too. And just like as another point to that, like the obvious fireball is the name of the fireball because you have to have you have a mage, you have a pyromancer, you have to have the obvious fireball thing, and like all the monsters and their little quibs about you because they like say things to you while you're fighting them with like hero come out to play and just like that kind of thing. It's great. I love that that they had such a good variety in there, and when you're leaving it's just like it's this, you know, please don't go sort of like thing. It's like begging you not to leave and just one more run. I'm just like, no, I don't have 8 more hours here, please.
Some of the goofy some of the goofy skills that I have yet to try out, but sound amazing. Colin, I think you mentioned Viking wizardry already. Mm-hmm. There's, I think, actually, I don't know if I've picked Necronomicon, oh my God, okay. Economics, Necronomicon, combined, I'll try this slowly, Necronomiconomics. There's one, I think this one I think is from one of the DLCs, but Diggle Curse. There's one Battle Geology. There's Piracy, and of course, everyone's favorite skill to select, Communist.
Wait, is that from one of the DLCs that we didn't play? I don't remember.
I think it might be because I think we were all well. I installed the free DLC. I've yet to name my expansion, but I don't think I saw Communist in there. But now I'm super curious to.
Oh, you know, I would have picked Communist. just because, like, what does that even mean in the context of a dungeon crawling game?
Exactly.
I mean, are you giving the money back to the Diggles?
Yeah, maybe we should explain what is a Diggle. There's lots of enemies in this game, one of which, a class of which, are Diggles. But what are they? How would you describe these things?
A Pokemon?
It's sort of, yeah, it's got like it's just like it's the thing you fight exclusively in the tutorial as like a getting started, and then like it's kind of your low level enemy essentially. Like you kind of see him throughout, but yeah, what is he got? He's got like a big old like drill for a nose, and he just kind of looks like a little like yeah, some kind of a small Pokemon with little arms and legs, and he just kind of jumps out of the ground at you and makes funny noises.
I'm gonna say he's like a Charmander, except with no flame on his tail, and his mouth is a drill.
I think
But there's
those
like many different flavors of them.
Yeah, they're I think Diggles are kind of like the unofficial mascot of the Dredmor game, because the DLC, when I installed it, has a different splash screen when you first boot it up, and it has like statues of like buff Diggles like flexing in the background, and like them flying all over the place, and just kind of like being the poster child of this goofy cartoonish charm that the game has all over. But yeah, there's various enemy types, like things like blobbies, blobular kind of enemy with big googly eyes on it, Diggles that we've kind of talked about already. There's baddies, bats, there's Grim Reapers that just walk around with scythes. I thought that was an interesting choice to just have multiple Grim Reapers. There are zombies, there are your kind of like classic djinns. There's things like octos, which I think are so I don't really know how to describe some of these things.
They're kind of, they look like they're from Zelda, right? Like the little things that pop out of the water and shoot water at you. Except for they're on land and they shoot like, you know, magic at you.
And don't they have like little like fishbowl helmets on or something, if I'm remembering right?
I don't think they had the fishbowl helmet. I think they're just like a squid, basically, sort of a head to them.
Okay.
But maybe
maybe that's just like the color of their head. But
I'm looking at the sprite, and it looks like an octopus head on maybe like a cloak of some sort. So maybe
it's like a wizard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You got your unfriendly AIs of
oh, that was my favorite.
Tread-based murderous robots.
When they hit you too, they say time to die, and that was like my favorite thing.
Eelies, which will live in water and leap out Loch Ness monster style at you. There's like scarecrows with pumpkins for heads that run around.
The golems, which were my personal least favorite, they just surround you and smash at you for a while.
What's your guys' opinions on thrusties?
Oh, okay. I mean, for people that have ever got into One Punch Man, there's a creature. It's like, what's he, the something sperm, the black sperm, that's whatever. He looks just like him. I'm surprised that like it feels like that was pulled from this game potentially, because they're just like very, very similar to each other. And he's got a little hip movement there where he's kind of thrusting at you, and I tell you what, it's very provocative.
And of course, so you encounter, I think the enemy, how do I describe this? Pacing ? Is very good in this, where they don't throw like all of those monster types at you on the first floor. I think they kind of like sprinkle them in as you get further and further in. But they kind of do like palette swaps of, you know, versions that you've seen previously, but now they're like super blobbies and what are they, Diggle commandos that are like cloaked, that will follow you around and attack you. That I thought that was pretty fun. And I think like most of these can also be summoned too, right? Like you can summon them as like pets. I was playing around with
I didn't play any of the summon builds.
Oh, yeah, the I think Will was alluding to the pyromancy one, where you can summon like a little flying dragon who just wrecks everything.
Yeah, the first like 3 levels, amazing. 4th level, it starts questionable, and then he's just garbage, basically.
I was using a lot of the I think I did a pyromancer build first, but I was using that the little flying dragon guy, and the was it like Gog's tactical pyre, which is just like a single unit flame thing, and that just ruins people too, which is great.
You know what else ruins people though? Is a flail and very strong arms, just running and hitting things. I felt like in some ways, having done the like barbarian style build first, I missed a good chunk of the strategy of the game, because I I had no strategy. It was just run and charge and make sure you don't get surrounded. Like I didn't really have to do much in the way of tactics. I could almost ignore mana for the most part.
You use mana at all? On mine, I had no mana. I had one skill that I never used, and so I literally just run in, click guys, they would die, and I was basically invincible. And it was
I
like,
had
oh,
some
terrible.
of the Viking stuff had mana, so like it was like a boost on damage that was useful. But generally, I was like mana. Like mana was not a limiting resource for me. And I think that definitely was a less, I mean, it was effective, but probably a less interesting gameplay style, because like I play games to make the choices. Like I'm not having fun just clicking on the enemy. Like I want to have it like be some sort of like puzzle, especially a game like this where it's not real time, so there's no reaction skill involved. So really the decisions are the game. I think having something that lets you interact with the world a little bit more is probably a better build style for getting enjoyment out of the game. And also there were just so many items that I didn't really use, and I couldn't figure out. My biggest complaint with the game is that the icons were very small, and I had a hard time, like at a glance, knowing which one was which. Like and you're trying to hover over it, and it just shows you the little icon under the item. You're like, which thing is that again? Do I care about that one?
Yeah.
Do I want more blues, or do I want like whatever the orange, or is that an auburn square? Some of those colors look pretty similar too.
Like, which orange is that?
I mean, it was built in 2011, right? So the average resolution at the time was microscopic compared to what we're running, and so all the UI just looks terrible on these screens. And so yeah, I noticed that as well. And like I had to like learn to expand the map out and learn to like
right, yeah.
Like before, I'm just like I have no idea. That's totally useless up there in the standard format. And I didn't even realize there was a button to expand it because it was so tiny. It didn't even look like an expansion button.
Yeah,
I will say
that definitely helps.
I will say I was kind of glad to have gotten my Steam Deck with enough like runway time to kind of test Dredmor out on there, which I was actually like surprised at how well it played on there. And like despite like the UI being like painfully tiny, at least on desktop, like 1440p, like I almost needed a microscope to see what was happening. Like on the Steam Deck, it actually like worked pretty well. And like there's a lot of like click dragging kind of that you have to do. Like you can I don't know if you knew this, but if like you do like shift click, it just automatically puts it into your inventory.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I didn't realize that for 6 hours.
There's a setting in the game where you just like, if you get near stuff, you just pick it up. That was a game changer for me. Like I don't want to pick things up. I just want them to be in my inventory, and then I go sell them.
Go to the pocket dimension in order to store it too. Like that was an innovation in this game that I think was incredible. That was a really good idea, and I think that they deserve some credit for that one.
So what do you use the pocket dimension for exactly? I thought it was just like I didn't really know what it was, and I just like I clicked on it. I'm like, oh, I'm in a different room now. I'll go back to where I was before. I'm not quite sure what to do here.
Yeah, no, it freezes time, and so you go into this realm where you can't eat or drink anything, so you can't get any more mana or health, but you can store things. And so you just basically like, if you're overburdened, you go up, or if your inventory is full, you just
that's where you store all your ore.
Beam it in, and then I had one pile that was like my 2-cell pile, one pile which was like here's my mana things, here's my health things. Before I was like kind of like scattering it all out so I could see everything and kind of get an understanding, but then I'm like, no, giant piles of things with our multi-purpose is the way to do it, because it's really fast, and then you can save things, and because you don't know if they're going to be useful later.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because like a lot of when you throw stuff on the ground, it stays there. Like it doesn't decay. It doesn't like run away after a certain number of turns. And like the concept of like, yeah, like I kept trying to figure out like how the hell do I do all this crafting with like such limited inventory space? And the concept of like, oh, I just go into the pocket dimension, throw it on the floor, never occurred to me until just now.
Right. No, I didn't realize that until like after my first playthrough. And I kind of like played it once fresh, and then I did a little bit of light reading about like how do you play this game effectively. And it's like, oh, here's one of the big obvious things. Like great. They really didn't. They should have mentioned that in the somewhere in the game, because no idea that was a thing.
I do want to. I have a bullet point here to shout out the music in this game. I think also kind of helps with that like irreverent attitude, like set dressing of like, yeah, this like crazy dungeon does feel like a suitable location for light loungy jazz music.
I muted it pretty much right away. I was like watching a show basically while playing, because it's turn based or whatever. So I'm just like, no, I can't be listening to this music for hours.
The music was fine.
I do like the fact that it has that kind of like, I mean, for a game that was developed in the early 2010s, it has that kind of like late 90s kind of like adventure game, like MIDI tone to it,
definitely,
which feels very, very kind of like warm mug of cocoa, just this is like a nice kind of background music you can sort of slip into. And yeah, like if you're like me, playing it on the couch, muted so you can listen to the watch the local news at night, it the game works perfectly fine like that. Is kind of like you're listening to your favorite roguelike podcast, while playing playing this game on the bus or something. Yeah, I think the music is worth shouting out. I think like the art style, I think we've kind of talked about like the aesthetic, but like the actual like art direction is I think like fun, and like the little skill boxes having like your berserker skill is just like a close-up cartoon of like the character screaming, I think like gets the point across very well.
It's very aesthetically consistent. Like they did a good job. Like it didn't work. Like it wasn't my favorite art style, but it was well executed. Like there was very tonally consistent, even in the parts where it was inconsistent. Like it was consistently irreverent. All of the little art icons were goofy in this similar way, that like helped like synergize with itself. And I can imagine if you like that, you would really like that. Like it builds on itself well.
Right. But I mean, like I have had this game. I probably bought this like 6 months ago, and I haven't played it because I looked at that icon and I see those eyebrows and I'm like, I hate this art. I cannot stand how ugly this looks. And when you get to the game, to be fair, I mean, I think it's a quality game, but man, the fact that the character doesn't actually wear the things,
yes,
that like, because I'm teching out this mage or this warrior. I want to see the main character, and this is probably because they had a $2,000 or $3,000 budget, like was mentioned, but like that was the one thing that kind of bothered me. It was like, I don't care if you're using a generic weapon or whatever, but at least look like a warrior. If you're a warrior, just the class, not anything else. But they didn't even get to that. So it's just like the generic dude doing the generic moves all over the place. That was kind of a pretty lame as far as the art goes.
I had for a long time one-armed leather jacket, and I was very disappointed that my little sprite man was not wearing a sweet leather jacket and like a goofy hat.
I mean, if Rocket League has anything, is that people want to express their individuality through their appearance.
So really, what they should do for
Dredmor, for
hats. Yeah, they Dredmor 2 needs to have an item shop, is what you're saying.
Dredmor.
Just let you wear the item.
Dreadmost, excuse me.
Yeah, I think like for me, the things that I wish could have been done better, like I felt like the maps were like way too big. And I say this as like a Cogmind enthusiast, that like, oh man, this feels like way too big. And that like there didn't feel to be like the monsters were kind of different between each floor, but that was kind of about it. Like if like the sandstone of the second floor was the same as kind of like the wood pilings of the third floor, then like what else is there to really differentiate other than just kind of like a different design of the stuff that you're walking on. And I think, well, also this may have been exacerbated by me playing on the no time to grind mode, because I was like, okay, I just want to like let's speed this along, let's just like get to floor 10. And even with this mode on, that limits the size of each dungeon floor considerably. I still haven't gotten past like floor 6 or 7 just because it takes so long. Like on that mode, I think monster zoos are still on every floor. So you kick open a door and a very aptly named monster zoo awaits you. You do get an achievement for beating it though, so I think that's nice. But
I was
there's
very
only
disappointed that there wasn't like a treasure chest in there.
I mean,
Like-
once you clear it, the random sort of like there's a screen that says here's your item for clearing it.
Mhm.
What? Maybe I didn't actually clear it.
Yeah, so sometimes you have to like they run away or there's an underground one or something. I've noticed that.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah,
That's
that's kind of
unfortunate.
yeah. You have to make sure that there are no survivors from the monster zoo in order to get your reward. But what's your guys' take on like the half of your character being like blocked off sometimes, like view wise as you're walking behind things?
Oh, that was lame. I mean, like there was, I mean, okay, so traps are one of my biggest complaints with this game, to be honest. Like traps were like put in there, it felt like to make the rogue a viable like player, because otherwise there's like no reason. If you have a trap behind a wall or behind like hidden underneath, all your only notification is like a slight glimmer. And so you hit them all the time. And like traps were like why I died in almost all of my runs where I didn't put points into perception. And so that's why I maxed that out basically. But really, really annoying stuff. And I think that like, yeah, having the wall just kind of give you a semi visibility would have done so much work there, because some passageways you couldn't even tell was really a passageway until you like walked through it.
Yeah, I think the wall blocking thing was maybe my biggest criticism, just because, yeah, like you said, traps are basically impossible to see. There's like a bouncing red arrow to indicate that like there's an enemy there, but like I don't know. I think like there's a lot of lessons that have been learned since 2011 in terms of game design, so I can't really fault 3 developer team that much for it.
I feel like so my biggest criticism was in trying to figure out how to do the crafting stuff. Like, okay, so there's a lot of things where it builds upon itself. So you need to build this in order to build this, and you need to build this in order to get these things together. And having played a lot of games that have I mean, what game doesn't have crafting now? And I've played a lot of Factorio, which is like they should sell that knowledge to corporations because it's so streamlined. It's hard to go back to a system where you can't just click something and have it like build a tree for you so you know exactly how to build stuff. Like I was like, oh, I got this diamond. What does a diamond do? Just have to like scroll through my list of all the different recipes. That's not fun. That's not, I can understand why you wouldn't like that. Takes a lot of extra work to build that in, but that's a thing that 10 years later we've become accustomed to having like exquisitely built crafting systems. Like the design language is there that just wasn't there in the same way in 2011.
Same with storage I mean, like as much as I said the pocket dimension was an interesting idea, like you're still ultimately like scattering things out. You're manually clicking things and then putting them on the ground or like shift clicking them to drop them underneath you. And it's just like, I want organization and I want it to be automatic. And I don't want to have to build a system of chests. I don't want to, put things into like columns I just want you to have a system and just let me automatically dump everything into that system. So I know it all is, and it's all universal. It's just like, it's really obvious stuff. Well, let me ask you guys.
It's obvious to us now.
Right. Yeah. It's
less
obvious
obvious
now.
then.
Right. How much of the game did you spend sitting there smashing the space button?
Smashing this that's the
advanced time button,
right?
Yeah, that's how you're regaining your mana or your HP without spending any like so you're just sitting there like advancing the turn and just
I think I maybe hit that pretty often until I realized that there's a digest button.
Right, that's but that's if you wanted to like waste your precious resources. Like, but for like mana and stuff, it's just like you kind of want to keep that stuff for like when you really need it. And so it's just
I sold wine because I didn't have any use for mana.
Yeah. When I was not using mana, I was selling all that stuff. But like later, like once I got to the Dredmor the first time and I realized how important potions were in particular, like I'm just like I want to hoard this stuff, and so I'm just gonna like basically smash space in order to like, and it's just that is not a fun. Like waiting as a mechanic is not fun, and they kind of build that in so that
you should be able to just hold it down.
Right, or like wait until an enemy enters your view, advanced time, or until your health is full. So I don't know. That really was not a fun thing. Never has a space bar been smashed so much and so often for so few mana points. It was bad.
Yeah, that's kind of like it's a potential flaw in that you'd say that you never want the optimal strategy to be just wait and do nothing. And like that is absolutely optimal strategy, is go fight a single monster, run away, wait till you've recovered to full health. Like that is like if you wanted to truly grind your way through this dungeon, like you could do it safer. But I don't want to do it safe. I want to do it fun.
Well, I mean, that'd be true if you weren't spending like it takes about an hour on average to complete a floor without the kind of the minification mode. And so like you're talking about 10 hours. And so if you're like on floor 9, like you're just going through like blasting open doors without full health and like just kind of like rolling the dice, you're like, if you die from that, you're just like, oh wow, I lost 9 hours of my life doing this. And it has to be fun. And the fun level, like I started another playthrough recently. And I'm just like, you know what? Now that we're done with this podcast, I think I'm gonna go ahead and call it good. Like it's kind of it was charming for a while, but I think I get it now. And
we got a lot more roguelikes to get through.
Right,
next
exactly.
year, so don't want to burn yourself out too fast.
Yeah, another kind of logistics item for the podcast is that I don't think us three will have all the time in the world to beat every single one of these roguelikes, because there's a wide distribution of really how much time you can spend to get to the final boss equivalent or whatever for each of these. And in some cases, we might see everything in 15 minutes. In other cases, it might be like 80 hours before we get to whatever sort of end game state is. So I think as a caveat, we'll probably aim for somewhere around like an hour-ish of like gameplay time for each one of these, just to get a good sense of what it is. And who knows, if we like it, we might play more. And I think some of these,
or at least an hour minimum.
Yeah, you said an hour. That's a tutorial, in some cases.
Yeah. But in some cases we've played some of these games a lot already, so I think we have some pretty well-formed opinions on. Do we have any final thoughts about Dredmor before we move on?
I'm excited now that we have a base that we can kind of grow from. Like this is the 2011, and now we get to see it kind of develop over time. Like right now, for instance, we're like noting things like 1 hour per floor on a 10-floor system. How does that change over time? Because it seems like everything now is like these maximum like an hour, 40 minutes for a complete
I'm comparing
run.
it to
so Hades,
right, where just
exactly.
like you're blasting through that,
or a Slay the Spire run. I mean, like all these things are just
right,
dicey dungeons,
full run in an hour,
right? And so it seems like everything's kind of shrunk down to this, like here is a gameplay window, and we want you to have a complete experience in the amount of time that you might have a gameplay window. Whereas this game very much did not have that as a consideration. Maybe a floor in the window, but like even then, like we said, it was way too repetitive and not enough variation by a floor to really keep you in there till the end. At least me.
Well, the good news is that it as of the first episode, Dredmor is our #1 highest rated game for the podcast. We're slapping it up on the rankings. You can find our rankings and many more stuff that we have up on our website that we have, which is the Going Rogue Gaming Podcast, or GROGPOD, GROGPOD .zone, because everyone needs a great vanity domain. There you can find all of our rankings, and you can find links to previous episodes and all that good stuff.
Scott, I'm going to have to disagree with you here. I think this is actually, you said this is the best we've played so far. I'm actually going to say this is the worst one we've reviewed yet.
Ooh, wow. Too true, Colin. Too true.
I think I'm just, I must be cursed by Diggles right now to give it the positive
infected your
review.
brain.
Yes. Okay, I think that does it for us. We'll see all of you gentle listeners in the next episode.
Alrighty.
Cool. See you then.